Welcome to another formation breakdown. In this episode, we're going over hollow square, which is probably the third in popularity overall under arch and wedge, but is also just generally a solid option if you are a garrison player or a very heavy shield user. So in today's video, we're going to be going over the overall base stats and where it fits those commanders, the specialty inscriptions and which ones to prioritize, and the non-specialty inscriptions and which ones are best set up. Also, we'll briefly cover where hollow square and Testudo kind of differ from one another, and just to discuss when you should use which one. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's talk base stats. And this is a weird one because hollow square's base stats don't really show you definitively where they fit. But the base stat is a 2% less damage taken, period. Flat, less damage. This makes it a popular choice in the early game and for tank marches before you get the specialty inscriptions. However, once you get to the specialty inscriptions, they're all oriented around shields or some type of shielding. So in reality, while hollow square's base stat is nice, it's more about the shielding itself. So that is something to keep in mind. So most of the time the commanders you're going to see using this are Charles Martel, Hera, or any other commander that uses shields. Gorgo on occasion will be seen with hollow square because she has a small shield. Particularly when she's put with Hera, you'll see hollow square used. But this is more of a future formation because as shields become more and more prevalent and they become more meta commanders with shields, you'll start to see this become more popular. But until then, the specialty inscriptions kind of put it out of range for use in any sort of practical sense for field, rally, or garrison because the specialty inscriptions just don't do a lot. However, if you are a lower level player who is building a commander and isn't planning on getting specialty inscriptions, or not going to be getting them anytime soon, you could always use hollow square for the broad 2% damage reduction. One last thing I wanted to touch base on is the hollow square versus Testudo argument. And really, I broke it down pretty well in a shorts video that I'll include in the description, but it comes down to how hollow square versus Testudo works. Hollow square gives 2% less damage taken, while Testudo gives 5% less damage while shielded, and all healings increased by 2.5%. So if you take away the healing, because they don't have a healing commander, and you're talking about purely a shielding commander like Hera, mathematically, it's about 40% shield uptime it takes before Testudo becomes better than hollow square. And when you look at the overall inscriptions on the codex for Testudo, most of them are about the same. It's a boost to shields and a boost to healing. And then strength of shields boost to counterattack damage dealt, boost to shield strength and healing strength. Normal skill damage resistance, 3.5% bonus to damage dealt when you receive a shield. Just like you have the 10% chance, or you have the 3% bonus damage when shielded versus 2% when you're not on hollow square. And then a 7% boost to healing and shields. So it has more shield boosts, but it ends up becoming not a super large amount of difference. And then if you have healing as well, it's a big difference. So for example, if you have Zenobia and Gorgo, you're going to use hollow square versus Testudo. Testudo becomes better because of the healing on Zenobia. So if you have just shielding, it's about 40% more shield uptime versus the total fight. So if you have a minute long fight, and for approximately 24 seconds of that you have a shield or more, Testudo becomes the better option. Whereas if you have less than 24 seconds of being shielded out of that minute of fighting, then hollow square becomes better based on the final inscriptions. Again, but once you factor in healing, if you have about the same, if you have about 40% or about 20% shield uptime and you have a heal, then Testudo becomes better because you're improving the shielding and the healing. But as far as just shielding commander versus shielding commander, look for that 40% mark. If you can stay above it, Testudo is better. If you can't, hollow square is. Now let's talk specialty inscriptions, and this is where it gets weird because Hollow Square is probably the strangest of all of them. First, Cocoon gives 5% skill damage resistance. This is blanket and not tied to a shield. However, whenever the troop launches a basic attack, you have a 10% chance to increase the strength of any shields by 10% for 5 seconds. The 5-second cooldown also means that this can be up a majority of the time if you're getting swarmed. So it's perfect for Hera resisting swarm because you get more shield strength pretty much perpetually because you're always being hit by attacks and therefore always hitting back with counterattacks. However, the 5% skill damage resistance is also stellar, so it's not necessarily something that you have to have shields to be optimized for. Next, you have a 5% bonus to all shields, flat, and their troop takes 10% less skill damage while it is shielded. This is really exclusively a shield one, so it's going to be lower priority if you are not building a commander that uses shields and you are using Hollow Square. However, the 5% boost and 10% less skill damage taken is stellar if you have consistent shielding commanders like Hera. Third, we have Crowned, which is a 5% boost to all shields, again shielding. And if their troop has a shield, it deals 3% more damage. If their troop does not have a shield, it instead does 2%. So you get a 2% more damage dealt, even if you don't have a shielding commander. But 2% damage is really pretty weak versus some of the other non-specialty inscriptions, so you're not getting a lot of value versus just going wedge. And lastly, of course, we have Rounded, which is just 5% damage resistance. So, because there are two different types of commanders that build this way, either early game players who don't have shielding commanders or shielding commanders, I'm going to cover priorities for both. First, if you are not building a shield commander and you're just using these and you can get an inscription or two, I would say Rounded is probably the best because 5% damage resistance straight up means less skill damage, less normal damage, less counterattack damage. Then Cocoon because 5% skill damage resistance. Then Crowned. And then since the fourth one doesn't do anything for you because it's all about shields, that's the last one. However, on the flip side, if you are using a commander that has a shield, this is the best inscription you can get because 5% boost to shields and 10% less skill damage taken. Until you get a lot more skill damage based commanders, this is going to be insanely strong. Next, you would want to have the banner Crowned, as it gives you 5% more shield as well, and then 3% more damage. Then Cocoon, because you want 5% skill damage resistance, which is good, and then 10% chance to increase your shield strength, and then lastly Rounded. However, if you get Rounded in the middle as well, you can really move them up as far as 2 if you want to do priority. But the only thing I would say is more important is to get this one right here because 10% less skill damage taken versus 5% all damage is probably a bonus on top of having the shield boost. But in either case, really any of them will benefit you to get in any order, and it's probably the most open build path out of all the ones we've covered so far. Next, let's cover the non-specialty inscriptions. With the specialty inscription, you do have a chance to have up to 2 total inscriptions. So you can have the specialty and then a normal one beside it. So this is what you want to have in those slots, or if you cannot get the specialty, what's a good option. Note that for the armament stats themselves, I covered that in the main video, and the link will be in the description. First, for the scroll, my 2 favorite are Pulverize, which is a 10% chance to gain 20% bonus to all types of normal damage, or Breaker, a 10% chance to reduce target's defense. Ward is another one I like. After using an active skill, you take 5% less damage. If you're in a garrison, I say Pulverize and Ward. If you are in the field, I would say probably Ward and Breaker. Furious is one that is also an option, 8% bonus to all types of skill damage dealt, and 3% bonus to all counterattack damage. This is good for the field, especially if you have AoE, because all types of skill damage then get boosted by 8%. Next, for the instrument, Guarded is one I really like. A 10% chance to reduce damage by 20% whenever you take skill damage. It's once every 5 seconds, so it is a trade-off there. Respite is another option, where you take a basic attack. You have a 10% chance to take 10% less damage for 2 seconds out of 5-second cooldown. This is great because it's 10% less of all damage. So that's something you want to keep in mind as well when you're looking at this. The other one I want to talk about is evasive here, 2.5% less counterattack damage. This is the more offensive option, so that's something you want to think about here. And devious is another offensive option that gives 2.5% more skill damage and 1% more counterattack. For Garrison, I recommend respite and either devious or guarded, depending on your preference. And then for a more offensive or field-based thing, I recommend evasive and either respite or devious, depending on your damage source. For the flag, you have some good options here too. Strategic is one that's more of an offensive use. Sentries is one that's more garrison, and I love sentries as a garrison one, so keep that in mind if you're going for garrisons. Assertive is a more field-oriented one, 2% more damage while on the map. Eclipsed is 2.5% less skill damage taken. Warflames is 1% extra damage. And Brawler is another one, 2.5% more skill damage of all types and 1% more counterattack. So for garrisons, I recommend sentries, and then either Eclipsed, Warflames, or Brawler. And then for the field, I recommend Brawler, Warflames, Eclipsed with Pursuer or with Strategic, because you can surround enemies much more easily. So Strategic is probably one of the two I recommend for the field. Lastly, for the emblem, you have a lot of great options. This whole bottom row is just perfect for anything defensive. 3% less skill damage, 1.5% less all damage, and 3% less counterattack damage. Guardians is 2% less normal damage. These four right here are all about damage reduction, and I love them. Evasive is another one, 1% less all damage, but it's just outdone by Watchmen. So if you can get Evasive and Watchmen, that is probably the best, because 2.5% less all damage taken is just really solid. But if you can get one of the two with Guardians, Counterer, or Deflector, that will also be just generally speaking great. Shielded, Hardy, and Infamy are just the general health, defense, health, and attack respectively. So they're good, but really you should be trying to get those bottom four: Guardians, Counterer, Deflector, and Watchmen, if you can manage it. But with that, we will wrap up our discussion on Hollow Square Formation. This is definitely a formation that I think is very solid, and I think it'll only become stronger as we get more shielding commanders. But let me know down in the comments, is this your favorite formation, or is there another one that's your favorite? Or if you want to see me cover another topic, let me know down in the comments, or join the Discord using the link in the description. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.